Welcome, Gyno-Curious listeners. I am Dr. Amy Novat. We are here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. I don't know about my listeners, but aging has its challenges. With the passing of the years, I feel more aches and pains. My skin is crepey, and the lines on my face are becoming a map of a life long lived. I practice mindfulness and gratitude, but there are some days I need to be inspired by another woman, older and wiser than me. Today, I am speaking with a woman who motivates me, inviting me to be my full self, and who models the aging process with integrity, joy, and honesty. Saskia is teaching me how to embrace all the years, bringing both the beauty and the blemishes. I am so happy to welcome Saskia Shakin, a mentor and a friend. Saskia, the keynote coach, has worked with corporate leaders, industry mavens, and performing artists since 1980. She developed a specialty she never imagined she could, helping economists and lawyers, explaining cases to juries and courts, using plain English and vivid storytelling. Saskia is a native New Yorker with a BA in linguistics from Teachers College at Columbia University, and she currently resides in the Hudson Valley. Saskia is a beautiful 79-year-old woman who has a lifelong interest in wellness that's helped her navigate the process of aging, while fully recognizing, in her words, that none of us get out of here alive. She's here today to help me talk about her own aging experience and ways in which she has remained vital, healthy, and engaged. But I want to just start our conversation by reading a poem that I came across, Saskia, by Sarah Gilbert and Susan Goober. Women will starve in silence until new stories are created, which confer on them the power of naming themselves. Saskia's story is one that I hope inspires all of us to speak to a different paradigm around aging. It's so darn hard. I don't know about you, but my body reminds me daily of the passage of time. And in this youth-centered society and with all the internalized ageism, it's hard to find a quiet, comfortable place around the process when one's joints are hurting every day. So every day in my office, I'm asked about ways in which a woman might look younger, feel better, how to get rid of the wrinkles, the cellulite, and the sagging skin. And the questions seem to focus mostly on the cosmetic interventions, but I really want us to talk about how to be well in the face of aging and how to live a healthy lifestyle instead. So the other day, I was sitting across from you, Saskia. We were having a delicious lunch. And I was looking at you and thinking, oh my gosh, this woman is so beautiful and alive. And I use that word very purposely because I meet other 79-year-olds who are living and breathing, but they're not full of vitality. And I started to tell you about how women I know are beginning to get cosmetic procedures done, friends, acquaintances here in Manhattan, and that I used to say I'd never do anything. But now I realize I'm saying never say never. So I thought it would be interesting just to bring out some statistics. So according to the latest annual statistics from the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, nearly $16.7 billion was spent on cosmetic procedures in the U.S. in 2020. And this just keeps increasing. And then this thing called COVID happened, and we were all on this bizarre thing called Zoom. And I don't know about you, but I became highly critical of my wrinkles and my double chin. I had no awareness of it. So I guess I would just want to start by saying out loud, I have no real judgments about the decision to have cosmetic surgery. I respect every woman's individual decision. But I do tell women in the office that if they decide to have some surgical or non-surgical interventions, that there are risks to every one of these procedures. And that it's a bit of a slippery slope, that when you begin to have these procedures, you want to have more and more because every wrinkle becomes a crevice and you want to get rid of it. So I guess I want to ask, first of all, have you ever had any cosmetic surgery done?
I would not let anybody with a scalpel in his hand near me if my life depended on it. So I'm just a scaredy cat. No, I've never had anything remotely done. And I don't think I would consider it because I've been born with a lucky quality that I've always looked younger than my years. I hated it when I was 12. I wanted to look 18, and I probably looked 8, but it served me very well later in life. So I don't know if I can take credit for my attitude. I feel as if I got a lucky break that when I tell people my age, and I make a point of doing it whenever it's appropriate, they look aghast as if I'm lying, as if they want to see my passport. And of course, it's flattering. I won't say it's not, but it also made me think about something that happened to me when I was about 22 to 24, which really had an impact, although at the time I knew it would have an impact. I didn't realize the extent to which I would carry this with me. I ran into a woman who was a friend of the family that I did not see very often, and I admired her no end. She was, at that point, probably in her 50s, and I was in my early 20s. So I ran into her after maybe 8 to 10 years of not having seen her. And we bumped into each other on the street, and I said, "Oh my goodness, I would know you anywhere. You haven't aged a bit." And she smiled and she said to me in a very poised way, she was European. She said, "Thank you. I know you meant that as a compliment, and I take it as a compliment, but I haven't seen you for about 10 years, and I've lived. I've gotten married again. My life has changed. I've learned a lot. I've lived a very rich experience. And I would hope that some of that would show on my face." It just stopped me in my tracks. I had never seen anybody approach aging that way, as if it were an honor to have your life written on your face somehow. And she was a nice looking woman. She wasn't what I would call beautiful physically, but she glowed. She had a radiant spirit that literally came out through her pores.
Yeah, I have so many. So it just makes me think about so many issues relating to aging. My comment often is we have two choices. We can either live fully and age or die. And most of us are not ready for death until we're ready for death. And
Yeah.
so it sounds simplistic or maybe even a little patronizing, but I really don't mean it that way. I mean that if we're blessed with the choice of waking up each day,
Yeah.
then how do you take an attitude or change your attitude around aging? And it's hard. It's really hard. We live in a world where women in particular have been told that the only way they're valued is by physical beauty. And thankfully that's changing, but there's still a great deal of uh, misogyny and, again, youth culture that permeates our days, our radio stations, movies, books, everything and anywhere. So what you're speaking to is attitude. And I think that there's a certain amount of aging that is, we call it intrinsic aging. And this is what our genes dictate. And you spoke a little bit about you were given good bone structure. But I want to tell our audience, I'm sitting here looking at Saskia, and in all of her beauty, trust me, she's got lines, she's got wrinkles, she's got folds in her beautiful skin that tell a story, tell us about the years that have passed. And then there's this other aging phenomenon called extrinsic aging. And this is the impact of lifestyle and environment on the aging process. And there are so many factors that contribute to aging: oxidative stress, glycation, telomere shortening, mutations, aggregation of proteins, all the science that goes on in aging. But let's talk about attitude. Let's talk about lifestyle and wellness, because that is what I think has allowed you to just move through the years. Not just an attitude of, I'm going to tell my story and allow my face to tell the story. And I love that, because that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to help our audience hear stories from women and men around all the issues around aging, healing, wellness, etc. So let's talk about what you've done in your life to help you be boldly 79.
I think that if we don't see ourselves as old, we don't look old.
Hmm.
And that sounds really simplistic, and I apologize for the simplicity of it, but it's how we view ourselves that comes out in what we project. And I've never seen myself as old because I was always very petite and slim until somewhat recently. I'm still small and I'm certainly not heavy. No one would describe me as heavy, but I'm heavier than I used to be. What else is new? And it's how we see ourselves that gets conveyed subconsciously, usually, and sometimes more consciously. But I've always loved the word radiant. I don't know why. It's just a word that I love. I once took a course at Kripalu called the Radiance Sutras when I was very deeply into yoga, only because of the title. I knew nothing about it. I loved the professor, the teacher, who was fantastic. And I don't remember much about the sutras. I just remember how great he was, how he affected my thinking. His name is Lauren Roach, and he's an expert on meditation. But apart from that, I think that if we view ourselves a certain way, that's what gets conveyed, whether we intend it to or not. And I remember being young when I was living in New York and thinking to myself, when you walk Broadway in front of Fairway, our old territory, you see all kinds of people of all ages and sizes and conditions. And when I was maybe in my 40s, I would look around and say, why is it that some people age so beautifully and others look like hell?
Yep.
Save me from that, please. I'd rather go before I look like that. And I thought, this can't be, this is a choice. They are making choices, and we can all make choices that affect how we age. I don't know what the right choices are, but I just figured some people are doing something right and others simply are not. So I think inadvertently that question, that wondering about what makes people look vibrant and radiant, got me into all kinds of alternative everything. And with all due respect to you as a doctor, I have tried my very best to stay away from most doctors, but it's not that I've been negligent. I've gone to acupuncturists, a great favorite of mine. I've done yoga seriously for most of my adult life, regularly. Some years more, some years less, some years practically not at all, but I always came back to yoga. It was my touchstone. I've done yoga, acupuncture, chiropractic work, massage therapy, homeopathy, you name it. If it's good for you and somewhat natural and healing, I've done it. And I really attribute the state of my body to some of those practices. But most of all, I still agree with you. It's an attitude. And I think everything is an attitude. Every choice you make will create an attitude, or every attitude you assume creates a choice. You can play it both ways.
Yeah. And you use the word healing, and I want to focus on that a little bit because healing is an active event, literally on a cellular basis, but also in terms of mind and body. And to comment on the rigidity of allopathic medicine, it's true that there's a certain amount of inability to look outside the box, and each individual has to figure out a way in which he or she or they are going to move through time. And again, I make no judgments about what one might choose, but it is about opening one's mind, which is part of the being beautiful in aging, both internally and externally, is being open to new experiences, saying yes, surrounding yourself with people who are of all ages, diversity, backgrounds, because this keeps the mind busy and it's an interesting mirror. It allows us to say, oh, yeah, there's more than just this aging, perhaps dismal way of looking at things. And I've got to be reminded of that, particularly if we get into that low place. So let's talk about healing because it is so much about the mind and the body. And you've mentioned yoga and acupuncture, et cetera, and what these alternative modalities can do or what they're focused on is both mind and body. So can you speak a little bit about that for us, please?
I believe that, as many people have said, many smarter and wiser people have said, we are energy. We are bundles of energy wrapped in skin. And our energy is what keeps us well. So I have followed the practices that work on energy. Yoga specifically works on moving energy. We think it's about the asanas and holding the pose the right way and doing this and that in perfect alignment, but it's not. It's about moving our energy in a way that allows our body to flourish and to be well. And I think that in addition to the physical choices we make, there's also a choice that I made probably in my early 50s. I'm not sure I made it consciously, but I made it. And it was simply to give up worry.
Oh, that's a hard thing. I don't know about you, but I'm continually working on that one.
I have to say, I did it because life did something to me that I wouldn't have chosen particularly, but that taught me worry is just a useless pastime. It really does not serve anyone. I'm reminded of a quote that I had put in my book by Mark Twain. He said, I am now an old man, and I have known many worries, and most of them never happened.
It reminds me, and I can't quote it effectively, but I was reading about fear, and it might have been Pima Chodron, I'm not sure, but so bear with me, but it was about how fear, like worry, is just a different part of the imagination, right? That our
Yes.
imagination can go to these beautiful, creative places, but our imagination can also go to those horror stories, right? That's why films that are horror stories are part of the array of films out there. And yes, if one can think about the imagination as this beautiful, big, amorphous bag, let's empty it of fear and worry and malcontent. And it's an active process, and that's okay. It's the practice, right? It's the practice every day of reminding oneself of how to be as well as possible. And I also want to point out that, Saskia, I'm not going to reveal your medical history, but I want to remind the audience that also being of ill health at times during our lives, and there is no one, absolutely no one who avoids ill health. And I don't care if it's COVID or a cold or cancer or heart disease, that this whole array of being ill is also part of the learning. And that it's important that we, in fact, experience illness. One, because our immune system builds based on all the challenges it's exposed to. And hopefully, if one experiences ill health, let's just talk about heart disease. One might say, maybe I need to move my body. Maybe I need to build cardiac function. And that's the learning, or learning how to eat better. So we're not talking about having a life never without illness. We're not talking about a life filled with nothing but energy and positive energy. No, that life is about the shadow and the light, and that only, for most of us, only when we see some of the shadow, the ill health, do we ask ourselves, okay, what's going to allow us to feel more radiant? What's going to be our individual radiance?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I have to tell you, without going into my medical history, I've always had a rather sensitive gut. Nothing major, no ailments, no diseases. While everybody could scarf down a burger, a milkshake, and potato chips, that would have put me under. So I was the person who was ordering a more healthy meal in a restaurant or eating more healthfully at home. And I often tell people it saved me
Yeah, yeah. What
because
we
I
put
would
into our
easily,
mouth.
yeah,
Maybe what we put into our mouth affects who we are and what we say affects who we are. I just uh
yes.
I just had this wonderful image of this two-way street, and it's not about vomiting. It's about the words that we're putting out there is,
Yes,
yeah, aligned to the foods that we put in. Yeah.
it's very true. I think if I had not had a rather sensitive gut for most of my adult life, I would probably have indulged the way I see people do, and I would not be sitting here feeling vibrant
Right.
and really have stuff to deal with. Now, I've had some stuff to deal with, but it just doesn't seem important to me. It's not the first thing I think of.
Mm,
Like, it's part of my life, and I've learned what to do, what not to do, and I've experimented, but it's not what controls my thoughts. And I feel as if, again, it comes back to attitude. I did not see this myself, but I read a description of a beach in Italy in the summer with very scantily clad women in bikinis, of course, and some topless. And there was a description of a woman. There were lots of beautiful young girls on the beach with perfect figures and looking great. But the description was of this woman who was probably in her mid 50s at the time, had quite a bit of heft, not a slim figure, very curvaceous, long hair, no makeup, of course. It was the beach. Some people would get done up for the beach. And she just owned that beach. She walked down to the water with pride in her body, carrying herself like a queen. And every head, male and female, turned to watch this woman move with all the distractions of all these pretty young things lying around half naked. And the description was very precise and detailed. And I thought, wow. At the time I read it, I was probably 40. And I said, I want to be like that when I'm 55.
right on.
And again, it just comes back to me. It's about attitude.
And energy, right?
Energy.
This woman was standing at the edge of the water, and from just telling the story, I can almost feel, right, the energy emanating out of her being. And we're talking about confidence. We're talking about knowing oneself. It's about saying, you know what? To heck with the world around me. I am going to be who I am. And
Yeah.
it's such a profound, profound lesson. So thank you for sharing that story.
It goes way beyond the aging process and wellness, Amy.
Yeah.
As a coach in public speaking, I have watched people transform literally from one minute to the next when they've touched their own authenticity.
Yep. Yep.
And I
It's
didn't teach them anything. I didn't do anything. I sat and listened and watched them go from someone who didn't have confidence to somebody who totally believed what they were saying. And therefore, you wanted more of it.
yeah, there's something so seductive and inspiring and healing. Again, I have to keep coming back to that word about that attitude, that way of being. I hear you, and I'm sharing your story with our audience because I want them, one, to hear your voice. Your voice speaks volumes, and your experience tells us about your singular journey, but about universal themes of how do I be? How do I keep going? How do I face the obstacles that invariably happen, both on the surface and internally? And how do I find what choices am I going to make around this wonderful life that we have that we don't know when it's going to end? And how do we remain strong women in the face of a society that doesn't particularly admire us. So I'm here to say we need to speak loud and louder and manifest our age both spiritually and emotionally and physically and in our community so that we can live vital lives, but also that women and young men, I mean, that young people can see this process and admire it and emulate it and understand it for themselves.
Afraid of it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. To, again, take that fear out of that bag, if you will. Saskia, I can't thank you enough for sharing your journey with us. And I will look forward to our next lunch. And I wish you continued healing and health and well-being.
Thank you so much. It's really been a joy to speak with you.
Thank you also to my listeners for joining me as we venture into the limitless conversations about our bodies and the world of OBGYN. I would love to hear from you. Please email your questions and comments to comments@radiofreerhiniecliff.org or call us at 845-307-7446. Also, thank you to my producers, Jen Hammoud and Matty Rosenberg. Until our next conversation, stay healthy and stand strong in your knowledge and your insights.